Okay, we're going to be starting now. Siman Reish Hey. Reish Hey discusses the dinim of selling as a result of being forced, of Baonus. From the Simanim that we're learning, this topic of being forced to do something, to commit to something, to do something, to sell something, to buy something, or to give a divorce, is things that come up in Beis Din more often than not, than other things over here in these Simanim. We're going to start going through it, and we'll go through part of what's Neget Sif Aleph, and then we'll continue next week with the rest of the dinim that are connected to this. The Torah begins by making a statement. It's based in the Gemara. Someone who's forced to sell, and he received money payment for his sale. The sale is valid whether it was a sale of land or whether it was a sale of movable property. Then the Torah brings the opinion of Rabbeinu Yonah that in land there's always sale, the din of sale, whether he gets paid the full price or not, even if he gets paid less than the value. Why? Because the only time you could cancel a sale because the value is not right is when you have din oino, which is more than 20% less than the value, and there's no oino by karkois. But in movable property, being that there is oino, so if it's sold less than its value, then the sale is canceled. That means it's not canceled because of the oinus, it's canceled because of the price that was forcefully paid for it. And the Torah explains that Rabbeinu Yonah is talking about that the forcing was on the actual sale. That means he forced him to sell. He didn't force him for the price, how much to sell it for. And therefore, by karka, we say there's no ino. By metaltalin, he sold it for less. We say there is ino, and therefore the sale is batal. But according to Rabbeinu Yonah, if he was forced for the price also, that means he wasn't just forced to sell. He was forced to sell at a specific price. Then even though there's no dinay and no bekarka, in this case, even karka, the sale would be bottle. Why? Because we consider it as an oinus to give a present, not an oinus to sell. The fact that you're selling something for less than the value, even by karka, you're forced to sell for less than the value, makes it into a gift. And forcing somebody to give a gift, we don't say gomer makna. We don't say gomer makna. There's no sale. The sale is never took place yet, which means the money is given back and the land is given back, or the property is given back, or whatever it is. Then the Torah says another din. Obviously, this din that the sale is only if there are eidim that the seller, whoever got forced, received money. And then there's no difference what kind of forcing there was, but as long as there's eidim that the seller received the money, then we say that the sale is valid, because the forced sale is a sale. However, if they did not see that the money was received, all they know is that the seller admitted to them at some point that he received money, but then afterwards he changed his mind and he says that the B'Seisef explains that he did not receive the money, he denies it. At that case, the sale is invalid. Why? Because we say that he was forced, he said he was forced to admit that he received money. He was forced to transfer property, and he was forced to tell Adam that he received payment for it. But now that he's no longer forced, he said, I never received payment. In such a case, the sale is not considered a sale, because we say that he was not, that the forcing was not there was no sale. It was a force to accept something without payment. This sugya is a sugya which is known as Tol Yuv V'Zav, and all of you learned it in Yeshiva, that Tolyu v'Zavin, the actual definition is they hung him up on a tree and he then sold. That's how Rashi explains that basically that they put him up on a tree, or they gave him some other Yisurim until he says Roitze Ani. What?
If he gave the money, the Edom sold. It's a sale, though, even if he was forced to.
Yeah, that's the idea. But we're talking about if he didn't give them, but the Edom didn't see that he gave the money. I'm just saying the idea of Tolyu v'Zavin is he was hung on a tree, and his sale is considered a sale. When he says Reitzani, that's what the Gemara says. Comes the Beis Yosef and says, you don't need to say Reitzani. The same thing would apply if he was quiet. He received the money and he didn't say Reitzani. He was hung on a tree, took the money, sold the property, and did not say Roitze Ani. That's what the Beis Yosef explains. Comes the Shulchan Aruch, Beis Yosef, the Mechaber over there says, he paskins that you don't need the Eidim to see that the giving of the money. He doesn't paskin like the Tur. He disagrees on the Tur, based on how he explains it in Beis Yosef also. And obviously the Ramah then comes and says, Yeshayimrim, that he does have to see, that the Eidim do have to see the giving of the money. And then the Ramah also says, Yeshayimrim, that if he gives a shtar, it's not enough. That means if he sells and he gives a shtar, the seller, there was no transfer of money, but there was a transfer of a shtar mechira, then it's not enough. Some people say that it is enough by a shtar. And we're soon going to get to that. But let's go back a second. The Mechaber then, let's go continue with the Mechaber. We'll explain everything soon. Then the Mechaber continues and says one more point. If the seller gives a moidah, Mesiras moidah, goes in front of two Eidim and tells the two Eidim, here I'm telling you that I'm being forced to do this, then the mechira is batal. Even if the buyer / forcing guy did more than 3 years of chazakah, as long as the meidah is valid, then the sale is reversed. But there are conditions to the meidah. First of all, the Eidim have to know that he's forced. We'll soon see what does it mean to know that he's forced. And they have to know that he's selling because he's forced, and we'll soon get to that too. And they cannot rely just on his statements alone. And therefore, if it doesn't say, the Mechaber says, if it doesn't say in the Shtar Meidah that by the Eidim did not write that they recognize the Oinus, then it's not considered a Meidah. So to cancel a sale, the Eidim have to recognize the Oinus, have to understand that the Oinus, have to know that he's selling, that the sale that he's doing is because of the Oinus, not just that he was Oinus before and then he sold from his own free will, and that it's not coming from just based on his own statement. That is the Mechaber. Let's go through this, the Nekudas that are relevant to this. Start with the Smeh. The Smeh brings that there's a machlokes between machlokes Rishonim. How much do we need to know? How much do they need to go back to the beginning? What's considered zvina? That if it was sold because of the oinus, it's considered that it was sold. He says, according to the Tur and the Rosh, if the people who saw the sale did not know at that moment that there is a oinus, but they see that the seller is selling against his will, it's not considered a sale unless they know and they recognize what kind of oinus is happening. Why? Because we need to have a gomer vehikna. We need to have a Gmirus das that the sale happened. And for a Gmirus das for the sale happened, you have to have the Eidim have to be able to testify. We know there was an oinus, what kind of oinus it was, and we recognize that to be able to relieve himself from the oinus, he made this sale, and through that hanoeh that he has from relieving himself from the oinus and receiving money, at that point the sale becomes a sale. But the Smeh says, but according to the Mechaber, the Rif, and the Rambam, it doesn't seem like you need that the Eidim have to also recognize the oinus. It's enough if they see the transfer of the money, because the Gamar Vehikna will depend on the transfer of money. Transfer of money is the proof that he was Gamar Vehikna. In other words, Machlekes Rishonim, does the Gamar Vehikna kick in as a result of the transfer of money? That is the proof that there was a Gmirus Das to sell the property, or that the Gamar Vehikna happens by them recognizing that there was an oinus and that he's relieving himself from the oinus. So you've got, yeah.
If you make somebody dog, I'm not selling baratzah, that would be effective?
If you what?
If you make somebody dog, that I'm not selling it baratzah, you don't know the oinus.
No, according to they have to know. It's a machlekes if you need to know if the Eidim have to recognize the oinus or not.
Being legal das, that's not baratzah.
Doesn't make a difference. Taliyuv Zavan is not baratzah, obviously not baratzah. We just say that the ratzin, the Chachamim established that the ratzin came afterwards.
So, when does it batal?
No. But if we have the Eidim have to know that there's oinus. They have to recognize the oinus. According to Mechaber, the Eidim don't have to recognize the oinus. The Eidim just have to know that this, even if they have to know that the sale, that the money was transferred. That's enough. And you could come and scream afterwards, but oinus, it's not going to change. Sifkat and Gimel, the Smeh also puts a very important klal. Even though the Shulchan Aruch and the Torah and the Gemara mentioned Tol Yuv Zav, and they took him up and hung him up from a tree, which is a very big oinus, it's not just that oinus, but it's telling you, even in such a massive oinus like this, where we are pretty much sure that he's doing it against his will, the Chachamim still say that deep down, Behai Hanoi Gomaru Makne, he agreed to sell it. Alachas Kam V'Kam, and anything smaller. Any smaller oinus than that. That you cannot come and say the Megach is batal because of a oinus. Now, when in Sifkot and Dalad, when he says that, in Sifkot and Dalad, the Smeh explains that the Shitta of the Mechaber that says that you don't have to have Eidim testifying, that the Eidim don't have to see the transfer of money. What is he trying to tell you? He's trying to tell you, La'apuki the Deya, that if the Eidim did not see the transfer of money, but there was an admission that the money was given, and then the admission was retracted, that the Mechira is batal. He says, no, the Mechaber is telling you, no, it's not. If there was a Haidah that money was given, that's already good enough. They don't have to actually see the transfer of money. Then the Smeh jumps to the thing of to what the Ramah says. The Ramah over there brings that as a Yesh Oimrim, that if a transfer of a shtar is not enough to create a kinyan, so the Smeh says it's a specific kind of shtar. What shtar are we talking about over here? We're talking obviously about a shtar which has a price, and it says that the money is owed for later. Zokafol v'milva. And still we say this, the Ramah says that it does. The Ramah brings the Hashem that it doesn't work because there wasn't actual transfer of money. It became like it's a forced halva. Forced halva doesn't have the same anah to be able to say Gomer Makne. So now that 2 weeks later the buyer comes and wants to pay the seller based on the shtar, the seller says the shtar is nothing. I was forced to sell you. According to this Yeshem, you could go to Bezdin and undo the sale and say, I don't want to receive the money because this thing was forced. And there was no Gomer Vehikna. Gomer Vehikna is only if there was transfer of money, according to this Yeshemlim. And then Yesh Chalkim, the Ramah says that other people disagree and say that in such a scenario, being that there is a obligation that he has to pay the money, so therefore there was a Gomer Vehikna. So if he comes later and wants to pay the money based on the shtar, he gets the transfer of the property. The Shach disagrees with this man and says, no, obviously we're not talking about over here a shtar with Zokafol v'milva, because that's obvious that it's going to work. We're talking, the Machlekes is talking about a shtar mecher without a transfer of property, and it doesn't say over there that there is a debt for the property. In other words, looks like a matana. It's a shtar that says, I sold it to you. It doesn't say for how much. It doesn't say that the money was received. It doesn't say anything. It's a shtar which he says, I sold you, I sold you this property. Or I sold you this property. And it doesn't say anything about that he owes him money. And in such a case, there's a machlokes. Some say that shows, the fact that he signed a shtar shows on Gomer Vehikna. And some people disagree and say that giving such a shtar does not show on Gmirus Das. And the Yesh Chalkim say that it works. Why does it work? Because the mere fact that you have a shtar which says one person wants to give, one person wants to receive, that's already enough. And the Rabbi Kiva Eger right away points out is it's not just so easy that a shtar that's given flies. There has to be a little bit more to it. He has to say to Shakel, go and take it. It's not enough of just a piece of paper signed, even according to the Yesh Chalkim. Now let's go back to something which seems to be a very interesting, there's an interesting Nesivis, there's an interesting Tzemach Tzedek, which turns into interesting discussion regarding Gittin also. The Nesivis, the first Nesivis, first of all, if you went through it, the Nesivis gives a whole introduction to the Siman. I'm not going to go through it, but the Nesivis before Sifkat and Aleph has about a page and a half of a Hakdama. It's the last page of Siman Reish Dalet, a Hakdama to Siman Reish Hey, where he goes through all the Yesodis of דיני Oines. But let's go. The first Sifkat of the Smeh of the Nesivis is discussing what the Smeh says. The Smeh brings the daya of the Bishay, that the Smeh over there brings that according to the Rif and the Rambam and the Mechaber, it's mashma that even if the Eidim did not know about the Oinus, and according to that, it's still considered a sale, and he says it doesn't make sense. And then he starts by discussing the following topic. You remember I mentioned a few minutes ago that the Beis Yosef says that when the Gemara says Tal Yuv V'Zavan until he says Reitz Ani, you don't mamash have to have Reitz Ani. Shtika also works. And he says, how could you say such a thing? Kosher Moed. Why? There's a certain sugi in Gemara where the Gemara over there has one place where Tal Yuv V'Zavan works, one place where Tal Yuv V'Zavan doesn't work. And the Gemara right away answers the case where it worked is because he said Reitz Ani. The case where it doesn't work is because he didn't say Reitz Ani. How could the Beis Yosef come and say that if a person did not say Reitz Ani, that just the shtik is already enough? And he brings a bunch of other questions on it. And then the Nesivis will jump to the Maskana of the Nesivis. It's not the Maskana, but it's a long piece. It starts with Lachan Nidel Anius Daiti. The Nesivis starts by Nidel Anius Daiti to explain it. And he explains as follows. If the seller forces the buyer, the buyer forces the seller through Oines Mammon or through Oines Aguf, either through beating him up or through holding back money, whatever it is, and for the person to be able to be potter, for the seller to be able to be potter from this big Oines, he sold it. What do we say? We say, what does the Gemara say? That Agav Unse Gomer Makna. Because of his Oines, he actually went and effectuated a sale. What does that mean? That because the Hanoah that he has from relieving himself from the Oines and receiving money, through that he sold it. He says, who made this decision? The Chachamim. The Chachamim gave us, it's the Umdne de Muchach, that this is what happens when you receive money and you relieve yourself from Oines. Umdne, 'Umdene, that's how it is. 'Umdene, that you sold it. Gomer v'hikna. Now, the Nesivis, the first Nesivis, is And you don't need to say Reitzani, because any place where there's Umdin Demuchach, you don't have to say Reitzani. Yeah, because the Chachamim established the Chachamim gave us the Umdin Demuchach, and it's as if it's Anan Sadi. He also uses the word Anan Sadi. It's Anan Sadi based, the Chachamim gave us Anan Sadi based on the Umdin Demuchach, that in the case when you relieve yourself from the Oynes, you got money for it. So even though you don't say Roitzani, deep down you are Roitze, or at least you agree to it. And yes, and therefore, in the place of a Umdine, Dvarim Shebalevim Dvarim, and the Dvarim Shebalev that we're talking about, he doesn't explain, but the Dvarim Shebalev we're talking about over here is the Dvarim Shebalev that he's happy, or he's agreeable to sell and to transfer, to relieve himself from this pressure. And then he continues that even to be matir and eishes ish, we also rely on this svara. What's the svara? That through a beating, a person becomes wanting to do something. Elamai, he explains, but there's one difference. By a get, you have to say Reitzani. Why do you have to say Reitzani? Because the beating is until he says Reitzani. It's what the Rambam says. No, at least that's what it seems like.
What's the whole hemshech from the Siddhis? It starts off by arguing on the Sasif for saying that.
This is the explanation. The explanation is that in such a scenario it does work. So therefore you don't need Reitzani. It's as if there is a Reitzani. That's how he explains it. It's as if there is a Reitzani, so the B'siyasif is not disagreeing with the Gemara. It's as if there is a Reitzani because there was a transfer of money. And then he says it's different than a get. By a get you have to say Reitzani. Why? Because by a get you also need Ritzu Yalev. You also need that the heart should want to do it, not just an agreement to do it. By a sale, an agreement is enough. What do we need for Gamar Vehikna? You don't need the person to want to sell. When a person has something that he likes and he needs money, no aynus, no nothing, he has a debt, or he's pressured, or he wants to buy a cucumber, whatever it is, doesn't make a difference. The fact is that he's selling and he's not fully happy with the sale. Still going for hikna, obviously. Why? Because the agreement to transfer something to somebody else for the purpose of receiving payment is enough. By Mechira, all you need is a haskama. By a get, you need the ritzui halev. You need the wanting. And to be able to prove that there's a wanting, the person has to say, Reitzani.
So the fact that the person just needs...
The fact that, the what?
He just needs the money, is enough.
It's enough, yeah.
The person can sell something, consent.
He doesn't want to. He doesn't have ritzui halev. He's not willing to do it, but he's agreeable to do it. That's how he explains the difference in the get and that, which means now. So now the same. By the way, this is from the Nesivis. You go 200 years earlier in the Knesset Agdela, the first Knesset Agdela on the B'Siyasef on this Siman, Sifkot and Aleph, Sifkot and Aleph, brings from the Rivash that the Rivash holds that you have to say Reitzani. He disagrees with the B'Siyasef. The B'Siyasef disagrees with the Rivash.
Reitzani with Mechira.
With Mechira, even by Mechira, not only by a get. And then short, in one line, the Knesset Agdela says, maybe you have to differentiate between shtika when money is given, that then it helps because of Gomer Vehikna, because of that Hanoah, or when the shtika is without money, and in that case, there's no Gomer Vehikna. In other words, the same idea as in the Sivis, but in 2 lines, without the whole explanation. Now let's move to Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek is not in your book, because Tzemach Tzedek on Hilchos Gittin, not on Hilchos Choshen Mishpat. What's the... Reish Samach Beis. Siman Reish Samach Beis. Well, Dvarim Shebalev, it's not a machlekes. Over here we say that the Sivus is mechadish that the Dvarim Shebalev by a mecher is that you do want to sell, even if you didn't say Reitzani. It's a big thing. That's the Dvarim Shebalev. Usually we say Dvarim Shebalev is fakert. Over here he says that because it didn't say Reitzani, Dvarim Shebalev is really is Reitza, or at least like a Reitza. In Even Ezer Siman Reish Samach Beis, long tshuva from the Tzemach Tzedek, and then it continues in Siman Reish Samach Gimel, and then there's Hashlomis to it in Siman Taf Samach something, Taf Lamed Daled maybe. And over there the case was a woman who stole money from her husband. Well, they were divorced, or trying to get divorced. She took money and she said, I'm not giving it back to you until you give a get. What did he do? He wants the money back, right? He takes the money. He goes, he's Moisel Midah, in front of two Eidim. I have Oynes Mamoin. My wife took away from me, $50,000. She's not willing to give it back to me. She wants me to give a get. The only reason I'm giving a get is because this Oynes, and the Eidim recognizes Oynes, and they give him a ksav. He comes to Bez, and he gives a get. What happens when you give a get? The first thing you do is Mesiras Midah. As Bittul Midas, Bittul Midas. And Bittul Midah, Tzivkal Midas, and everything, and anybody who's going to come say Midas, Bittul any form of anything which could affect it. And he did it. And he gave a get, and he got the money. And after he gets the money, he goes back and he says, he didn't get all the money that she's owed, he got most of it. And then he goes back to Bez and says, well, hey, here's a Midah, they get this possible.
The Ma'aser Shahaya?
Tzemach Tzedek says Ma'aser Shahaya, I don't know. I wasn't there, but evidently, if you answered it, it obviously was a story that happened. And Tzemach Tzedek has 10 seifim on this. Tzemach Tzedek's,
He said a get is possible?
Yeah.
And she wants a get? But then she's not going to want to be married to him, so...
We'll get to that, because Tzemach Tzedek brings that point soon, at the end of the tshuva. Exactly that. That's always one of the nekudas he's machshir to get is that. It's a good catch on that one. Towards the end of the Tzemach Tzedek. So Tzemach Tzedek begins and says, well, by Mechira we know, if you Moisel Midah, I'm really summarizing Tzemach Tzedek, if you Moisel Midah, and then you sell, and the sale is bottled, right? But if you were Mevatel, the Midah, before you sold, then the sale is valid. You made a Midah that you forced. And then you're Mevatel the Midah. And then you sell because you're forced. The sale is a sale. And he says, it seems like that even if you're Mevatel the Midah because you're forced, still works. Why? If a sale by force works, a Bittul Midah by force for sure works. Yeah, it's much less. He brings, maybe by a get you should be machmer. Yeah, this is from the Muki Yosef. Maybe by a get you should be machmer because of the reasons of a get. But by mechila for sure should work. That Bittul Midas via Oynes should also work. So that brings a bunch of opinions. It's all in Eis Aleph. And in Eis Aleph, it seems like Tzemach Tzedek is taking the position that by mechila for sure works, by a get, maybe it'll work. That's Eis Aleph. Comes Eis Beis with Tzemach Tzedek, and Tzemach Tzedek over there starts that maybe, no, let's consider, what's Bittul Midah? What's a Midah? What's a Bittul Midah? A Midah is a Dibur, saying something. Bittul Midah is, I'm using a Dibur, I'm taking one Dibur, to be able to cancel another Dibur. Maybe, he brings from one of the Rishonim, maybe, the Bittul, the Dibur of the Bittul has to be equal to the Dibur of the Midah. So by a Midah, the Mesiras Midah was Beratzen. The Bittul Midah, to be able to have a Osi Dibur Mevatel Dibur, you have to have also Beratzen. If the Bittul Midah was Be'oines, to be Mevatel a Midah Beratzen, then it's not a full Osi Dibur Mevatel Dibur, because it's not equal Dibur. So maybe it's actually not going to work if the Bittul Midah was Be'oines. Then Tzemach Tzedek says, no. Big Chiddush. Tzemach Tzedek comes and says in the middle of Eis Beis, if the Kfiyas get was Kedin, Apidin, That means not that they beat him up without a psak. There was a psak from a bezdin that he has to get beaten up until he gives a get. Psak kfiyah. And that's why they did it. So the oinus was kedin. Al pi din is chayav l'garish. What's a kfiyah? Kfiyah is al pi din is chayav l'garish, and therefore we're making a psak that they have to be oinus, that they have to be kfiyah's get. And in such a case, as a kaifanas that Shiyam Eloitzani, yeah, everybody knows Sikh of the Rebbe that explains what the Rambam over there says, that every person has a Yetzer Tov who wants to do what Chachamim tell him to do. And
Some Sikh also has this one, right?
Has this idea.
For Shemus, why you can't write occasionally.
Okay, because his neshama wants it right. And he has, and the beating up is not for him to say yes. The beating him up is only to weaken the Yetzer Hara, and that way his Yetzer Tov is going to shine, he's going to say Reitzani. All right, so if it's Kedin, then what he's doing is Mamash like Mechira. He says it's Kemechira. Actually, I'll read you the Nusach. It's a good lashon. He says because it's mitzvah l'shmaya divrei chachamim, so therefore when the oinus is kedin, so it's like zvine, the kaimel until you v'zav in zvine, the ma shehadin mechayv l'garish, because a pidin is chayv l'garish, have a leikem mekabel moment. It's as if he received money for the get. The fact that he's doing something that he has to do, ve'adif minei, even better than mekabel moment for mechira. When it comes to get, if it's chayv l'garish, it's different, and it's considered like a sale. It's considered like he received money. It's not considered like a sale didn't receive money. He's forced to give a get al pidin. It's considered like a sale that he receives money, and therefore zvina, like zvina, same thing by a get, and therefore it goes, it works. And the bitul meidah be'oines also works, and therefore there's no meidah, and the get becomes back to being beratzen. But if the oines is not al pidin, then we say, even though the oines to bitul meidah is shaloi kedin, the oines for a get, so we say dvarim shebalev heim dvarim, they are, in this case, heim dvarim. And dvarim, what's the dvarim shebalev over here? That he doesn't want to be mevatel the meidah is because it's shaloi kedin, based on this logic that the Tzemach Tzedek says, that when it's kedin, you want to do what's right. So it's obviously, your dvarim shebalev, you want to do it, so you're doing it good. You're doing it properly, so it's as if you received money. But if it's shaloi kedin, then deep down in your lev, you're not doing it because you want to be mekayim divrei chacham, because chacham never told you to give a get. You're just getting beaten up. All you're doing is to be yaitze from the oinus. So dvarim shebalevim dvarim, and therefore it doesn't work. And then the Tzemach Tzedek continues and brings other opinions that bitul meidaris machmas oinus doesn't work. Some say not even, it's not only beget. Some say even b'mecher. Even b'mecher it doesn't work. And then the Tzemach Tzedek goes to a whole gimel dalad hey vav Zayin Ches is a whole discussion if oinus mammon is considered oinus or not b'chlal. Before we get to, because if the oinus mammon is not really a oinus al pidin, then because we're going to get to it later in Shulchan Aruch, we're not going to get to it today. The definition of oinus is something that they're going to do to you. One of the svaras of oinus is something they're going to do to you, preventing you from receiving something lav dafka zayin, machlokes rishonim. If I'm telling you that if you're not going to, if you gave me a pizza that I decided is burnt in a store, yeah? I decided it's burnt, or I decided it's undercooked. So each person is different. And I say, if you're not going to give me another pizza, I'm not going to give you a good review. I didn't say I'm going to give you a bad review. I'm not going to put a good review. I'm just going to, and he needs the review. It's a new pizza shop, yeah? Then, is that considered oinus? Lav dafka. If I tell him to give you a bad review, ken sein. But if I'm telling you I'm not going to give you any reviews, who says it's oinus? Lav dafka it's oinus. Anyway, so that's it, the whole discussion if oinus mom is really oinus mom or not. Then comes ois tes. And this is what Chaim, what you said, similar to what you said. Today there's chayim der b'no gershon, which means that a person cannot get married until he gives a get if he's an Ashkenazi. What does that mean? He is unable to marry somebody else. By him giving a get, he's getting a massive hana. The hana that he can move on with life, to marry another woman. The Tzemach Tzedek says it, it's clear. Lashon Tzemach Tzedek. Tam Beis Lahatir, and then he says about the whole discussion of if it's shaloi kadin, and you're not going to be able today. There's chayim der b'no gershon. You're not going to be able to hold your wife hostage. She should come to you against your will. Yeah, because back in the day when there was no chayim der b'no gershon, so the woman was scared shema yisa acheres v'tisagen kol yamel. Alkein tamad etzla ba'korcha. She would stay by him against her will. Like in Achshav Shabbat Liefshel Lisa Acheres Mishum Chen Der Ben Gershom Elagelo. Yeah. In Kain K'moy Shehi Mu'ugenes Kachu Mu'ugon. They're both equally agonis. No, it doesn't work at the Merabonim Stamazay. In Kain Lutuchlach Klal Lamed Etzloi. She's not going to be forced to be by him, so he doesn't have a wife. She obviously doesn't care about receiving child support, especially since she took all his money away anyway, so she doesn't need child support from him. She hates him. She's clear she's never going to come back to him. Like here, she's separated for 3 years. And then he continues and says, more than that, it's not only that he's not getting her back, he has a gain. He's going to find a woman, he's going to be able to marry somebody that actually wants to be with him. We know it's hard for him to live without a woman. It's for sure considered like zvina zvina because he's getting a hana from it. The whole thing was done through oinus, and this is to explain even if the oinus was shaloi kedin, because before we said mitzad oinus kedin, mitzad his heart wants to do divrei chachamim. Over here he says no. Even oinus shaloi kedin, we could argue on that, putting aside the discussion whether get amausa shaloi kedin is kosher apostle. It's a separate discussion. Talking about, let's say that the oinus, the get was done berav. Here the get was done beratzen. The actual get was done beratzen. So we don't have the issue of get meusa. What we have is that he was forced to be mevatel the meidos. So we could say that it works. He says usually, and then he says no, maybe he is only not losing, but he's not gaining. And it's not considered like a sale. Because over here, what is he? He's not gaining something by giving a get. Okay, he's gaining his freedom, but he's not gaining something. He's dropping something which was blocking him. So he's not receiving payment. So he says, no, the fact that Chayim der b'no gershon still makes it that he gets a hanoi from the get that he could marry another woman, and it's considered like a zvina. And just like by Kiddushin, it's your koine through money, same thing over here. Same thing over here is the same thing. Hold on 1 second, let me read another line from it. Let me find it. And towards the end of Sif Tes, he says, what's the hanoi? The fact that he's receiving a hanoi that he could marry another woman, it's as if he received the money the value of the wife. Kevon sha'idei zeh get, v'ayidei shetach zeh smaman, hanechbaim dvoim v'chalik achisha. By him receiving the get, giving the get, and receiving the money that he's owed, it will all work out. That's in Oistes, and he continues expanding a little bit more on that. And Siman Reish Samach Gimel looks like the Rav questioned some of the things, and Tzemach Tzedek went and strengthened what he said again. The what?
So first it says Midah on the table. In general,
Yeah.
That's good. But then he says, Im Omar, clearly, that you should know I'm Mevatel because of Einus, and he says that it's Hayem Mechabatel.
If he says that he's...
The question is here, he didn't say anything?
He didn't say anything. He was Mevatel Midah. He says I'm Mevatel Midah without saying that it's a Mevatel because of Einus. We know that there's a guy behind him with a gun. Standing behind him with a gun to saying, say kach v'kach.
It's also...
Or I'm going to blow your head off. But say it. But he's not saying, I'm doing it because the guy behind me with a gun.
A few words, that was the time.
Yeah. And over there we say that there's the Hana over here, but he's talking about the get. So comes the Rav, Kanira, the Rav Asher complained about it. And he says, still not considered get Moshe because of 3 reasons. And the last one is that even if you're going to say, if you're going to argue if it is Einus Mammon, if it's not Einus Mammon, he says, and over there he says that a difference between Chafetz and Roitze. Yeah. Do you really want something, or it's just that you're fine with it? Yeah. Yeah. So towards the end of Siman's Reish Samach Gimel, he says, Kevon benidan nidan al korchach murav baze gam ken oid oines she'ef shleish of klal beloy isha umevakish tafkidoi. He probably had a job that he needed a wife for. V'idei get yuchal lisa isha ken yishlam de murav baze gam ken chayfetz u'tshuke mamash lisa isha shezehu chashuv nene mamash v'kevon shetzoyek mamash shetzoyne litin get. יש לי סלוי שכנו האמס, שיש לי תשוקה וחפץ לזה, מחמס התשוקה שיש לי אישה. ואף שבו מחמס עירוב אינס ממון, yeah, because he has money that's being held hostage, כיוון שמשתוקק ממש לזה. Really, he deeply, really wants a get. מחמס טעם השני, because the other reason, because he's stuck without a wife. הבלי כהוד אין קישו אלא לדס, דחושב רצן גמור. אף שבו מחמס אינס עצום, שאין לך אינס גדול ממנו. כל שכן אינס ממון, יש להם שאין אינס גמור. וכיוון שהרוצן שאחר כך, יש לו אמר שהוא חפץ גמור, he really wants it, the rotzen that comes afterwards, so that's it, יש לו שהוא חפץ גמור, חושב רוצן גמור, it's considered the full לענין in such a scenario. More extreme than the Sivis. In the Sivis, you have to say לענין. Here it seems like, Lavdafka, you have to say לענין. Interesting chkira in this book Chalas Lechem, from a book that came out like 25 years ago, but it's a Ksav from 250 years ago. He goes into interesting chkira. He's not machriya, but interesting chkira. No, he said everything Reitzani, but the question is, does it? Yeah, he said Reitzani. Yeah, but no. But how? What's considered a hana? No, I wanted to point out that even by a get you have a hana. Huh?
He's desperate.
Yeah, but
the hana of desperation. Yeah, you have to say Reitzani. Yeah, by a get, he's not going to go against the Rambam. Okay, now there's I told him is a Chalas Lechem, interesting chikira. What is the definition of Gomar v'hikna? Because we say over here that Chachamim said that Talyu v'Zov Chachamim tell you Gomar v'hikna. Yeah, Zvina. Why? Because we know Chachamim say we know that he's makna. What does it mean that you know he's makna? Is it that Chachamim know that deep down he was Gomar v'hikna and it's a complete transfer? Pretty much like in the Sivis, even though he's before in the Sivis, so he didn't quote in the Sivis. Or by Chachamim it's a suffix that it probably happened, And therefore, you cannot take the property away from the buyer because probably Gomar Vehikna. What's the nafkamina? If the Moicher then goes and grabs it back from the Kaina. He says, if the Moicher grabs it back from the Kaina, what's the din? If we say that it's Gomar Vehikna Mamash, he has no right to take it back. If we say it's not Gomar Vehikna Mamash, it's only a suffix, it's a suffix noita that it was Gomar Vehikna. Over here, he grabs it Shaloi B'fnei Edim, yeah, and he goes in front of Bezdin, and he says, what do you mean? It was done Shaloi Mirtzenia, I was never Gomar Vehikna, and I'm now the Muchzik. He can't be Moitzi for me because I was Typhus. And he brings Svaras Lakan brings Rayas, and he doesn't give him a skana, but the way he structures it is pretty much clear that he holds that the Chachamim made it like a Anan Sadi. It's similar to the Lashon of them. It's not Machriya like Nasivas, but it's like a Anan Sadi that he sold. And he continues and says, maybe even Vadai sold. That's an interesting one. Now, I want to point a few little things before we finish, because we're not going to be able to finish what's connected to this. We said that according to, well, pretty much, Zvina is only when there is, the Gomeru Makna by Zvina is only when there is transfer of money. The Matashima in Agoy Satura is Vav, and also the Erech HaShulchan, Sivkot and Aleph, brings it at Baz, that doesn't mean transfer of money. Also, let's say, if the seller had, let's say, a debt to the buyer, he owed the buyer $1 million. The buyer went and forced him to sell the property that's worth $1 million, and he told him, by you selling me the property, you're going to be waived. This debt is waived, this debt is clear, and that's the sale, that's the payment. It's already good enough. Because the hanoi that you don't have to give back the debt is the same as receiving money in your pocket. Kevon the soif hanoi yesh lo yitztarech lehoitzi mashetachas yodei v'hai hanoi gomer umakna l'kaim hamecher. That's one radbaz. In chelik beis soif siman chav tes. This is what the Matashiman brings. In Sifkot and Tes of the Matashiman Agoy Satur, he brings another radbaz from chelik gimel siman nun hey. Another interesting thing about payment, also another nekuda that's important. We said that if there's a machlokes rishonim, if you pay less, yeah, I know, by metalpun, right, the Rabbi Yoina and the Tur and all the people, if you pay less than what it's worth, he says, according to everybody, it seems like he says according to everybody, if the buyer paid the full price according to Shara Zoil, that means sometimes you have things which are worth this amount of money in the winter and this amount of money in the summer. When you buy strawberries, you know there's a difference if it's in season, if it's out of season. Yeah, but it's the same strawberries. They're just growing at a different time in a different country. So if you pay the full price of Shara Zoil, even if now it's Shara Yoker, still consider the full sale. It's not considered, it doesn't go into the category that you could argue whether there was no Gomar Vehikna because of this. And then another thing it brings us Sifkot and Yud Beis, another interesting nekuda from Shas HaTshuvas Bnei Yehuda, Siman Tezvav, that if the money, instead of being given to the seller, was given to somebody else, that let's say the seller owed money to, or that the seller said that it should go to somebody else, Bnei Yehuda says it also works. Why? The seller has hanoeh from money that's given on his behalf to somebody else. And that hanoeh also causes a gomer vehikna. Now let's just jump towards the end. I see if I can squeeze in another 3 points. There's the mechaber towards the end that goes into the dinim of Maidah, and over there the mechaber says, actually we'll discuss it a different time, the Maidah thing. It's already not going to have enough time.